Good evening, welcome for the special edition of the Sunday Show. We're talking this time for a pretty big event taking place in Copenhagen. This is the Ukrainian Reform Conference, which is named the Driver for Change. This is the second time the Western partners are supporting Ukraine in gathering the possible investors and the ministers from at least a dozen countries from the European Union, NATO and the G7. So the last year that was in London. Today this is Denmark is hosting, so Danish Prime Minister as well, the Ukrainian Prime Minister will be there on the 27th of June, and this time the Ukrainian government will come with their assessment of the Ukrainian reforms, as well would probably answer the questions of the Ukrainian partners and would present their plan. And to discuss that, what had happened before and what we can expect from the Ukrainian government, we have an acting Minister of Finance, Oksana Markarova, and Gleb Vishlinsky, who is Ukrainian expert on economy and is an executive director of the Center for Economic Strategy. So welcome. And first of all, if to be concise, we're talking all the time in the studio about the reforms, and our partners probably are sometimes even tired to hear, like the reforms are taking place. If to be very sharp and brief, so what is something to say that we have accomplished this year?
It looked like it was just a couple of days ago, but it was a year ago when we were in London and Prime Minister had a very clear plan. He came to London and promised 5 key reforms to be accomplished. The healthcare reform, pension reform, education reform, the privatization, start of the reform, meaning the adoption of the new law, and the public sector reform. And we are very glad that we are coming to Copenhagen now to say we have accomplished all 5 of them. So the pension reform, the law is adopted, the reform is implemented. Education reform likewise, healthcare reform, the implementation has started, and we know that the primary medical care is something that all Ukrainians are talking about, and the loan privatization is adopted. Therefore, we can now easier talk with the potential investors and welcome them to privatization, which is a key priority for this year.
Do you share this optimism and this positive assessment? Because if we look at the figures, still the numbers of what the foreign investors thinking about Ukraine, they're still, at least we have the figures of the European Business Association, so like up to 70% are not really satisfied with what's going on, first of all about the corruption, the rule of law. So are this accomplishment that good? Or what hasn't been done, what should be done, what could be done better?
Yeah, I fully agree that among those reforms that were planned last summer for the autumn, like there were 2 very complicated and very important reforms, that are pension reform and healthcare reform. And yes, the privatization and the draft law on privatization that was finally passed was as important. And generally, like there was a new trend for the Ukrainian government to finally stick with a small number of priorities and really accomplish these priorities in reasonable time as promised. So certainly it was a very good message for international partners and for investors as well. However, like when you speak about like real investment risks that foreign investors have in Ukraine, like here we come with the issue of the dualism of power in Ukraine, because like when we speak about corruption, when we speak about radar attacks, when we speak about racketeering, sometimes by state authorities, we need to understand that in fact like only one law enforcement agency is somehow controlled, being the part by Prime Minister and by the government, being the part of the government, that is Ministry of Interior. However, State Security Service of Ukraine, General Prosecutor's Office are directly controlled by the President. Judiciary, it was historically fully captured by Yanukovych when he was President, and still remains of the system are in place, and that's shows why having the law on creating a new independent anti-corruption court is so important, because like when we look on key obstacles for foreign investors, like top obstacles are lack of trust to judiciary and prevalent corruption. And in fact, like this law and like creation of this new anti-corruption court could really address the cases of corrupt judges, for example, taking part in radar attacks on companies with foreign investors, for example.
But obviously, the anti-corruption court that would it will happen finally. This decision is definitely welcomed by people in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine, by our partners. At the same time, it was still September when John Kerry, the former Secretary of State of the US, had told that, and it's taken just months. Therefore, there is some kind of a disbelief. Would it be functional? We can always say that it's up to the parliament. Its parliament didn't vote it, but we know that there was no, we can be very open. There was lack of the political will to do that. So I understand you represent the cabinet of ministers still. What would you explain to the investors that this decision would be fully implemented and the anti-corruption court would be working, not just be created for the sake that everybody would know that it exists?
We already have a positive example of National Anti-Corruption Bureau, which was created and already has positive result. The Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. On the government side, we already has shown that we support these reforms, both publicly but also financially. Every time that a new anti-corruption organ is mandated and created, we budget it right away. We finance it and we put it into the budget even before it was created officially. So we foresee that this law will be implemented. We actually even have in 2018 budget already money allocated for the anti-corruption court, which we have included into 2018 budget last year when we put the budget on vote. So we are fully prepared to support this new institution when it is created. And when we talk to investors, of course, anti-corruption court creation is a very important signal, but there are many other signals they are looking for. Our continuation of international cooperation with IMF and other IFIs been very important one. The continued deregulation, all the measures that the Cabinet of Ministers is taking to develop the economy, the setup of the Ukrainian Invest Office and other basically bodies that investors are very familiar with. Because essentially, attracting investments is not about numbers only. Our numbers are good. We already have 2 years of consecutive growth. This is the third year. The macroeconomic stabilization is there. We have a good trend on inflation. So everything is there to attract investors. And we already see that investors are interested. But it's all about trust, and it's all about convincing them that it is actually a very good time to come, that the economy will grow, that the situation, market environment will become better. Therefore, it will become more expensive for them to enter in 5 years' time.
At the same time, when we're speaking about the rule of law, this is probably one of the biggest issues for the investors and partners, because it's very much connected to anti-corruption, because anti-corruption is about the corrupt court. And it's not just about the high court or constitutional court where we have some progress. So how would you assess generally the judicial reform?
I hope that, in fact, like creating an anti-corruption court will have a significant impact on the prevalence of corruption in regular courts, because, like you could see, like when you look on cases at the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, that's a very significant share of those cases are cases against corrupt judges. And if these cases will go not to just another judge who is as corrupt as the one who is within this case, but this case will go to the independent anti-corruption court, then the chance that this corrupt judge who, for example, took some decisions that allowed some radar attack on some business, and like the chance that like there will be a decision that will send this corrupt judge to jail will be significantly higher. And if we have a critical mass of those corrupt judges going to jail, then their colleagues in other courts will see that the price, the potential risk that is for them in like taking these corrupt decisions, it is very high, and the risk is very high, and they will stop making these decisions, and it will slowly but very significantly improve the investment climate in Ukraine.
And speaking about the foreign partners, I would remind that the Copenhagen conference on the Ukrainian reforms is conducted together and with the Danish government, and it's a part of the support of the Western and the international community. The conference where the Ukrainian government will speak to foreign investors and partners and would answer the probably tough question. But what else we're expecting? We have also the comment from the Danish ambassador.
Everybody is saying it's more or less a cliche now that there's been more reform the last 4 years than the previous 25 years. But it's going to be more specific than that. And of course, the Danish side, with other partners, there's a strong group of international partners for Ukraine in this. We have, of course, engaged the government and said, it's up to you to deliver. It's a Ukrainian thing to deliver the results and to showcase them. And we also said if certain things are not there, it may be very hard to talk about anything else. And I should not say that one reform always is more important than the others, but there's no doubt that there's one area that has had more focus than other areas: anti-corruption. And on that, of course, I can only say personally that I think it's a good and remarkable result. That after all, your government can go to Copenhagen with a law that has met many of the wishes. There may be flaws. IMF has looked at it, and they should be, more than anything, also those to decide whether this is satisfactory. Venice Commission has been involved. From what I hear, they also think there are mostly good things in that law. So we should not, when we have results, we should also have the courage to say so. And you look skeptical.
I look skeptical because the talks about the anti-corruption law were there for a while, and it had been adopted in just a couple of weeks, speaking even days, though the discussion about that, and there was the really, what we say, the clear demand of the international partners, foreign partners, where it's up to Ukraine. So it can look a bit of that why the international partners should really push that hard for something which is good for Ukraine.
I've been here for more than a year, and all my time, the foremost issue to discuss has been the anti-corruption court. And there's been a little sidetracking sometimes, back on track. But a year ago, many would have said, we don't believe that reform will be there in a year's time. Now it's there. And we should be careful not to, when it's there, then halt and say, oh, yeah, but we needed more. It is a big result. I was with some civil society representatives last week, and I was very encouraged by the way they analyzed it, because they said, we always work for more, we should have more, and we should be hungry for more. But they also said, the worst that could happen today was that we lost what we already accomplished. So you should also, in that sense, let's be at least pleased that in Copenhagen there will be a lot of attention on the establishment of a new anti-corruption court. That, of course, is going to be a very important anti-corruption triangle. We already have investigation bureau NABU. We already have the special prosecutor, but we need the special anti-corruption court to finalize that triangle. That is on a good track now, is what I hear Venice Commission and IMF say. There are probably some things with some cases from the ordinary courts that should also be, if they are appealed, they should be appealed to the anti-corruption court, many say. Yes, there are things to look for, and I understand that there's a good discussion on that between those more involved than Denmark.
The skepticism is often there also because sometimes there are the good laws, but the issue is about the implementation. So each law could be not implemented properly, and there are always concerns. Therefore, what are the benchmarks for those that it would be working? That it's not adopted in order just to be adopted, and they say like, oh, now we have it. So what would it mean? What the particular things that would happen in Ukraine would bring the trust for, not personally for you, but the foreign investors, because that's whom you're also explaining what's going on here.
Yeah, and I would say not least the Ukrainian people, of course. They should have satisfaction in this field stolen from them, and there need to be a corrective in this. That's the foremost perspective, I would say, is to get rid of impunity. This idea that anybody can steal and nobody cares about it. It's horrible. I'm told that's not how it is anymore, that those who do are trying to hide. But Denmark has taken upon itself to implement the European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative, EOASI. It's a technical team we have here. I'm co-chairing the steering committee of that anti-corruption initiative of EU. Denmark put some of our own money into it. We have so far spent most time capacity building the independent anti-corruption institution. NABU, SAPO, ARMA, others, NAPC, tried to work with all. Some successes have been do the same for the court. We will do everything we can to support, and we have good donations to do it with. It's not only IT, it's also supporting on a personal way how to build strategies, how to mend your organization. We do everything we can to support these independent anti-corruption institutions, and we are so happy that there will be another institution to help. And I can assure you, it will get a lot of attention. It will not be left in a drawer somewhere. It will be having our full love and care.
At the same time, there is a discussion that Ukraine has a very robust anti-corruption activists, but sometimes in the discussion they are often criticized for maybe speaking too much about that, or sometimes there is a criticism that there are panickers who really in a worse, like more gray than it is, more in the dark light than it is. What would you say on that? How should be this discussion on? Because I think, like, you're also in this dubious position. You have to answer the international partners and foreigners on what's going on in Ukraine. At the same time, you probably would like to promote a bit better image of Ukraine than those who never heard about it.
It's an obvious thing, but to have people say that corruption should not be exposed in Ukraine because it damages the image of Ukraine, to me sounds like something from the moon. There are not many people I know who don't know that Ukraine has a systemic problem of corruption. It's not just to twat the image of Ukraine. We are strong supporters of Ukraine. We want, therefore, to take Ukraine the right way. And we also say that Ukraine has moved forward on this. There has been remarkable progress. I'll use that word, remarkable progress, also in the fight against corruption. And because a few years ago, nobody did anything. And many ordinary Ukrainians didn't want to pay their tax. They paid it in a brown envelope under the table and paid less. There has to be, you have to develop in society a shared belief that corruption steals our future. That's what it does. That's why the gross general product of Ukraine is as low as it is. And of course, it's very bad for the poorest. They have very little because somebody takes the money away from society. And therefore hinders the growth that would be prevailing in Ukraine were there not these barriers on investment that's ready to come in to create jobs, but they'll not come if they have to be involved in corruption and get dirt on their hands. They'll rather go somewhere else. There are many places investors can go. They'll not go to a place where they risk their own jobs, and they do that in today's world. In the Western business world, it's too risky to deal with corruption.
One of the priorities is, of course, privatization. It's something the foreign partners are expecting, and there is some progress. There is a working group, there is a law, but how will you ensure that it's working, that the privatization would be transparent, that those big companies, and I understand there are up to 20 big Ukrainian companies which are promoted to be privatized, that they still have some long history of corruption, maybe some court cases, the vested interest of different kind of people which are still there in Ukraine. So how would you ensure that people still need to buy them, and what would be those companies?
The reform of state-owned companies, state-owned enterprises, is one of the key reforms, and it's our key priority for the government for this coming year. I think we have really a good revolutionary law that provides some mitigating measures for investors, like we just discussed the judiciary, that we have problems with judiciary. Well, the new law provides to every investor that would like to participate in privatization an option to use the English law. And without going through the Ukrainian system, if there are any disputes with regard to privatization, go to the London court right away. That is very positively accepted by a lot of investors we are talking to. How can we prove that it's going to be differently and it's going to be transparent? Similarly, that how we prove that the corporatization and the appointment of the board members is going to be different. After Prime Minister has reset the nominating committee, which now consists of 4 people only and our international partners, the first company that we have reviewed and appointed supervisory board for Ukrzaliznytsia, a Ukrainian railroad company, we have selected excellent board, which includes Anders Oslund, Shevki Adjuner, the EBRD director, the key people from ex-Deutsche Bahn and others. So we can only show it by example. So the first object that is going to be privatized is very important. It's more important than anything else, because if the first company that is going to be sold, and we, believe me, will spend every effort to have it exactly that way, the first company where it's going to be transparent, open, and will show that investors that came and participated, that will draw more attention than everything we can promise.
Can you give an example of kind of the companies and spheres, industries they are working? Because we do have the list, but I can't guess that everybody has that.
Yes, it's energy, mainly some generation, but also energy distribution. It's some companies from the agri sector. It's the heavy machinery, like Turboatom. So there are some really interesting companies there to be for investors, potentially. Also, what I think is helping us in the privatization process, that we actually use the model that worked elsewhere. So we have investment advisors and we have the investment bankers that will be working with us. And this process of selecting of highly reputable international companies that will prepare the companies for the sale is very important as well. That's the additional layer of confidence and checks, essentially, for potential buyers.
And Lib, any loopholes still in the laws, or any other covered and hidden concerns about those companies, or you think that like just come and buy? Because the figure shows something very specific. Still, the foreign direct investments are really low. If we speak in, it's about like 1.8 billion of the US dollars, 7 times less than in neighboring Poland.
I think that the government and the advisors that are helping government in this process did their best in really like putting in place all needed laws and government decisions that have no significant loopholes. Now the key issue is speed. because like even with the best law and the best regulations, you could have a sabotage of the process on the level of technical execution, because like you could not just like change in, for example, central bank interest rate, just make one decision and then like interest rate is different on the morning of the next day. Like no, in this case, like you need to have a lot of technical things to privatize the company successfully. Really having these investment advisors is very important, because like part of responsibility is on their shoulders, and they have the financial interest in doing this as fast as possible and as successfully as possible. And I fully agree that like these first cases are very important, and as soon as we will have like 3-5 cases of good large-scale privatization, it could bring a very good effect of this herd behavior of foreign investors when they will run not only to state-owned companies but to buy private companies in Ukraine, because they could expect that on the next year the price will be higher.
If we speak about the speed was mentioned, but one point is, for instance, which is connected with the speed, there was an idea to have the investigative unit on the financial on the finance under the Ministry of the Economy, and it didn't happen. There are a lot of reasons of that. You know, it went to a different council, and we can speak about the political will. But particularly this institution also could give some promises that, you know, that okay, that would be in the finance, there won't be not law enforcement, but a different agency, analytical agency. But it didn't happen. Why?
You are absolutely right that actually taking pressure away from the legitimate business here will significantly improve the business environment. So I think that issue is more important for the investors and business, Ukrainian business that already works in Ukraine. And together with the SFS reform, the State Fiscal Service reform, and in general the tax administration improvements, that is very important to actually create a level playing field. On the Financial Investigation Unit, of course, I mean, it took us more than 2 years to discuss that new service that has to be created. Unfortunately, there were so many different options and different views and ideas on all the stakeholders on how it has to be done. I think now it's a critical time to set aside all the political or personal ideas about how it has to be, stick to the principles, how it has to be created. It has to be independent, it has to be not law enforcement, but really a very professional, intellectual, if you would like to say, financial investigation. It has to consist of new people. So I think, you know, we see it as one of the key agendas, definitely one of my key agendas, to push it forward together with parliamentarians and create.
Do you see that political will? I'm not speaking now about the Ministry of Finance, but in particular law enforcement agencies, and even this law enforcement vertical, which is really strong. It's under the president. Most of the law enforcement agencies are under some kind of, in different terms, president control. And how critical is this institution? Do we see any chances to move fast with that?
Yeah, I could expect that, like with presidential elections upcoming, there will be also a need for candidates, and we see that Petro Poroshenko is not as strong in polls as he could expect to make some decisions that are business friendly, and really not only business friendly but also like in general economic growth friendly. And here, like if we make a very strong decision of creating an independent anti-corruption court, if we successfully move forward with privatization, and we add to this like mitigations, these risks of like state racketeering by, for example, economic crime units of State Security Service, involvement of General Prosecutor's Office in all these cases, and like have the new, much better and less risky financial investigation service on their place, then it could create a critical mass of decrease of investment risks related to Ukraine. And like with all business opportunities that we have, like if we significantly decrease the risks, we could expect that more financial investors and more direct investors will come to Ukraine.
one of the things which is expected is the land reform. And this is absolutely political in Ukraine. There is no will by numbers of the political parties to accept it. Those still the government promises.
We definitely need to depoliticize it and go back to numbers and talk to our population. We are actively working on the models, discussing the models with the World Bank help. We are not only discussing the potential models of the land reform, which I believe will happen in Ukraine at the right time as soon as we find the right model to offer to Ukrainian society. But we are also working already on the financing options together with the World Bank on the partial guarantee fund. So because this is definitely the reform that will unlock a lot of economic potential.
But that's taking place for decades.
Yeah, 17 years, like this temporary moratorium for sales of agricultural land is in place for 17 years. And it means that currently there is no more time to wait to submit the draft law on the circulation of this agricultural land, which in fact will cancel the moratorium. Because for me, it is to more extent the issue of property rights, that even the issue of just attraction investors, because we have the decision of the European Court of Human Rights that this moratorium is in fact violates rights of Ukrainian citizens, and that the government should make all needed decisions to stop this moratorium and to let property rights of Ukrainian landowners to be used fully.
We can say, we're speaking about now about the clear already existing relations with our foreign partners, like for instance IMF, because Ukraine is dependent on the money from the International Monetary Fund. And always the government says we have a perfect relation, it's just a matter of time. However, you know, there is conditionality and still there are delays. How would you explain that?
We are now at the last year of our 4-year EFF program with the IMF. It's a very complex program, and we are halfway through the program. We received half of the money. That program actually allowed us to stabilize the economy, and our memorandum with IMF is probably the best description of the reforms that we have done and that we plan to do. Yes, there are delays. Some of them are based on the political process, because there are a lot of legislative work in the program. Some of them, like with the pension reform, for example, there were delays in the pension reform because we didn't have the right model. But when we have suggested the right model, actually IMF accepted the pension reform that we have suggested rather than what was in the initial memorandum. So I think we have a very working relations. It would be better to move faster, because I have to remind ourselves all the time that we are not competing with Ukraine in 2015. We are competing with the rest of the world. That's why, you know, the slogan Ukraine now that the government has now, we have to speed up. We know that.
Isn't it a bit humiliating that it's international partners who were reminding that many times about the anti-corruption court and about the conditionality, if we speak, and even like there is this message even growing that, you know, now everything is done under the, you know, there are more sticks than carrots.
In fact, like this pressure, this international pressure is very helpful, because we understand that there are a lot of interests in Ukraine that are against like breaking the system of impunity that we had for 25 years. So it is maybe it could be considered humiliating for the government in general, but and for Ukrainian political elite. But if it is working, then as Ukrainian citizen, I am for it.
And the final is, of course, one of the priorities for the reformists in this country is about the election reform. It didn't really happen, you know, like of the election code. But we're coming to the election year, election cycle with the president election next spring, and then next autumn the parliamentary election. So with everything we said, still we don't have this kind of trust of the stability, the political stability, and some kind of that you can understand what would happen with the country. So what do you think, what also are you concerned, what we can answer on that? To what extent all the things won't be done in order just with one reason, to be re-elected?
In fact, lack of electoral reform is the source of some problems that we discussed. Because, for example, why privatization is not moving as fast as we expect. In fact, it was not moving at all for more than 3 years after Euromaidan, because it is a part of investment cycle when politicians, according to the current electoral system, have an opportunity to buy seats in the parliament, then form, be the part of the government coalition, then take positions of ministers, and then manage state-owned enterprises and milk them to, in fact, get return on this investment into buying seats in the parliament. So, in fact, breaking this vicious cycle, and to fully break it, we need not only to look on from economic policy, but we look from electoral code and from electoral system. So if we do it, then we could undermine this vicious corrupt cycle on both important parts that are the source of it.
And Oksana, you're a civil servant. You're not a politician. You're not running, but still. Do you feel that there is a stability while working in this? Are you concerned about the election? That would be our final question, because that's what everybody asks us. So, but Ukraine is again coming to the election. So everything after a year, just with a new government, with a new parliament.
If there is one thing, the main thing that Euromaidan gave us is the actually rise of the civil society. And with the decentralization reform, I really feel that people are more involved now and people participate more. And we still have a democracy with all the criticism and everything, contrary to our northern neighbor. Whoever is going to be elected at the next elections is going to be elected in a democratic way. So I think this is the biggest outcome, and this is very important. And we see that there is a continuity in a lot of reforms. And some reforms that we have started, they are irreversible. That's what we try to focus on, to do the changes which are very difficult to undo. When you open something, like the public registers, like the public finance database, it's very difficult for anyone who comes after us to undo it, because I believe the general public will not allow it. So I think this should be the main focus of the people in the government, is do the reforms that are really necessary now, but do the reforms that are very difficult to undo, and do the reforms that are deeply rooted, that change the system. And then we can hope for the better, and that we can still achieve a lot before the elections. And if elections changes something which might not change something, then people who will come to the cabinet after us will continue and will contribute to the economic growth in Ukraine.
Thanks a lot for the discussion, and good luck in Copenhagen, talking to the foreign investors and partners really soon. So thanks a lot for being with us.